Welcome to another MBUK podcast. I'm Rob Weaver, and this is Tom Marvin. Hi, Tom. How you doing?
All good, thank you. Yeah, you okay?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
good. Establish this from the start.
Yeah, good. Today we are joined by the legend, and I don't use that term lightly, the legend, Chris Porter. Hi, Chris.
You should use it lightly.
No, it's justified.
No.
And we shall find out why.
No.
Yeah. I was when we were sort of thinking about this, I was worried that I might have to do the introduction because I didn't really know how to introduce Chris because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of things, and there's a lot of opinions as well. And
I've sent you a lot of emails disagreeing with things you've done as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We've had a chat this morning about things already.
Well, I guess I was thinking about it on the way to work, and I was thinking, Chris is maybe the first person, he's maybe the first ever to consider the whole marginal gains thing from a mountain bike perspective, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm. And you could, I would sort of say, possibly one of the most influential individuals as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at mountain biking now and you look at it from 20 years ago, there's quite a lot's gone on that, you know, maybe you've foreseen, even if you've not put in yourself, you know, you've
also
predicted.
one of the nicest and most generous, without a doubt.
And talkative.
And very humble.
Well, I'd like to think we've been generous. A lot of people have been on CB tours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We had a good time.
Absolutely, we did. Let's go right back then and start off with how the whole bike thing came about, because it hasn't always just been about cool bikes and suspension, has it? You kind of started way back doing something quite different.
Yeah, well, was riding bikes from loved bikes as soon as I could ride. And when I was a teenager, I ended up with a Pooch Murray BMX, which we used to go and ride at the Batch, my babs. Anybody that doesn't know what a Batch is, it's the coal tips in Somerset, and quite good grade, you know, coal waste used to come out, so nothing grows on them. So you got these 45-degree slopes that we used to just push up and ride down, like not making the best use of your altitude for sure, not many turns, but we also used to dig jumps and stuff and ride around in the woods on our little 20-inch wheel things because we didn't have any BMX tracks, so we were just riding off-road. But I got so well known at the Coach bodywork place round the corner because every time I rode it, I'd have to take it round there and get a double weld put onto one of the brakes. So it looked more like bird shit welding by the end of its life than it did a BMX bike. But mountain bikes had started to appear. You know, they appeared in BMX Action magazine, this cranky thing, and then Mountain Bike Action magazine started coming along, and I was reading the motocross magazines and the dirt bike magazines, and you'd see the mountain bikes turning up. And probably mid-80s when I was working, somebody brought a mountain bike in. It's like, this is quite cool. But by then I was already into the motorbikes. And bought first mountain bike probably 1988, 89. And that was, always wanted to race. Was always the idea that I was going to be a racer. Nobody was doing any downhill races then. So I did a cross-country race up the road from here, Ashton Court. Mass start in the field. So 1990, set off, mass start cross-country race. I'm bloody winning this. I'm going to win this. And then by the time I come halfway up the first uphill, I was in last place, I think. So downhill starts were key. But and then snapped the rear mech off and walked it back, and which was bad news because Suze was commuting that bike to work. So, but yeah, that's and that's how it started. Really started with the racing, and couldn't afford motorcycle racing. I was working early 90s at a motorcycle magazine, Fast Bikes, which Future ended up owning, actually.
Yeah, I worked on the same floor as those guys.
Did you? Yeah. I was working at Fast Bikes magazine. Couldn't afford to race the motorbikes, so I started racing mountain bikes. GT Avalanche, downhill bike, steel, hardtail, Mag 21s.
Yeah. Old school. Proper.
Old school.
Sorry, what were you doing at Fast Bikes? What was your job there?
I was a designer. That was quite an interesting one. I'd done a little desktop publishing course, and I just made up this CV with photographs of me riding motorbikes and, Greece, Italy, all the things we'd done. And I did a CV in the form of a magazine article. I said, like an interview, Chris, so pissed it up against the wall, haven't you? What have you been doing? And then I was answering, I've been riding my bike, So I did like an interview format and just lobbed them out on spec to all the motorcycle magazines. And the boss of Fast Bikes rang up. I thought it was like a piss take. Literally rang up. What are you doing next week? Come down for an interview. I'm off to Wales. And he thought, lives in Bath, off to Wales for the weekend. He won't hack London. And just thought, that's too hippie. That's too Led Zeppelin. He's not, he's not going to hack it. Every time I rang after that, he's like, yes. So I've retired. And but eventually, a couple of weeks after I got, chatting to one of the guys at the front, and he said, no, he's not here, mate. He's at Bruntingthorpe. So I got the map out. Bruntingthorpe Proving Grounds, where they do the testing of the cars and the motorbikes. Got the map out. Just rocked up. Security gate, the entrance. There with the Fast Bikes crew, mate. Yeah, they're at the back corner over there, mate. And just sort of literally rode up.
Blagger.
Literally rocked up, shook him by the hand, and I suppose he respected that I just fronted up and did it, and said, follow us back to London now. They're all on sports bikes, and it's like me on I think I was on the early Africa Twin then, like the first Africa Twin. And it was like spirited riding, and it's like you've got to keep up, because it's like this is your interview, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, and at the end of it, he said, "I'll start Monday."
So what were you doing? What was the role?
First day, I was going to do the design work. His designer had a bit of a problem, and it was London at the time, and he was also working for Snowboard magazine, so he's like super
the
cool.
white stuff, is that
yeah, and he was like, he liked the white stuff, but he was really, hanging around with a lot of people who were doing that stuff. So anyway, he brought me in to do that job, and but I rocked up first day. He said, "You're in dirt bikes, aren't you?" "Yeah. There's the Kajiva Elephant. I want you to ride it down to Woking, where we got our other office, get the brake fixed, ride it back, and write me 4,000 words on it," which is pretty cool. And so, as someone that's never been given motorbikes to ride before, it's like, how cool is that?
That's a hell of a first day, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's not the first day, mate. Got back, he's like, "You said you speak Italian." "Yeah." There's the Rolodex. Give Massimo Bordi a ring. He's the general manager of Ducati. Can you ask him for an 851 SPS? "Ciao, sono Chris della rivista Fast Bikes." "Ciao, come stai?" And trying to blag a Ducati 851 SPS. which didn't work. Okay. But he had me back on the Rolodex by the end of the day. He said, find Barry Sheen's number. What? You can talk to God? It's like, he's got a phone? You don't just receive information? No, he literally said, give him a ring. I haven't had his column. If he hasn't got it ready to fax, take it down. And luckily, he had it ready to fax because I would have had to be on the phone to Barry Sheen for it was like wild. That's day one. And it just makes you realise, you know, I literally got dropped in at a deep end. Makes you realise you can do this if you want to do it.
Yeah.
You don't, you know.
Did you sort of feel any like imposter syndrome? I'm assuming there might have been a bit of that, or
I am an imposter, aren't I? Still,
I think we all are.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, every other. Sorry, that was the. I haven't done the 10 minutes.
we can bleep that one.
Every other bleeper is, because you know when you look at what's been done, you know I could go back. Now I've got the confidence of another few decades of motorcycle riding. I could go back and say things about that Cagiva elephant that will be like, well, why did you do it like that? You know, why? Beautiful though the bike was, and you know, and for its time it was quite good, but you know there was an awful lot of stuff, you know, that everyone's an imposter because the people that want to get on are not necessarily the people with the skills.
You ended up on MBI, right? Which is Mountain Bike International.
Yeah.
How did that transition take place?
Oh, bloody hell. Strap in.
Okay.
So when I left the motorcycle magazine, I was really into the downhill mountain bike racing, really into the idea of starting a suspension company because the motorcycle racing had this sort of burgeoning market of suspension tuning and hop-ups and, you know, a sort of servicing, you know, service it to make it at least work X, hop-ups to make it work Y, you know, tuning to make it, you know,
almost making the best of what you got rather than buying a new thing.
And it was just starting in the mountain bike world in the States. You know, there were a couple of companies in the States doing the same thing, literally with just like things like Mag 21s and the Alps 4 shocks and the little Marzocchi shocks that had 20 millimeters of travel on the shock absorber, you know, and it's like, but there were companies already starting to do that. So that's what I wanted to do. And in finishing at Fast Bikes, I started the idea of this company and just put an advert in MBUK, but it wasn't. You know, there was business, but there wasn't enough business for full time. So I was also doing freelance work, sort of desktop publishing work in London and courier work, and I worked at MBUK a little bit in Bath. You know, just like. Just doing work on the computers, designing stuff and laying stuff out. But during all that time, I had this idea like starting a downhill magazine. And about the same time, Mark Noble was starting Dirt Magazine, and he contacted me and he said, "Do you want to be technical editor?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" And I said, because I'd been in the magazine and I had friends who were photographers and stuff like that. We started getting loads of content together, and we had quite a few quite a few pages of stuff that could have been put in like one issue or dripped out several. I think by the end of it, I'd done like, do you remember Chromlins, like the coloured proof things? Where I had like 8 or 10 Chromlins of double page spreads, and done all sorts of content. And out of the blue, one of the distributors had taken umbrage at the fact that I was doing both things. The magazine's not launched yet, mind you. And he said, "Oh, you're no longer technical editor. I've taken on Paul from Idden from Z Springs." It's like, so you don't want a suspension expert being a technical, somebody that owns a suspension business, but somebody else that owns a suspension business is okay. Right, yeah, I get it. So, and he goes, "Oh, and can I have that content?" I said, "Yeah, of course you can. But you've got to pay for it." Because I paid for it. Mm-hmm. And, "Oh, but you were doing it for us." "Yeah, I was. But now you've got to pay for it." And so I basically had about a third of a magazine, and I was like, "Oh, I should just publish one." So I was running around all people that I knew from the motorcycle publishing, and there were a couple of them like, "This could really work, this could work out." And it's like, one of the ones I went to was a guy at, it was Link House Publishing, I think it was, that was doing MBI, and they were also doing Superbike magazine. And we got to the point where we had the printer, we had the space, it all looking good, and something went wrong. I can't remember. It was quite complicated. So he got me a job at, he got me an interview at MBI, and I managed to talk my way into it. And as it was like cross-country magazine aimed at an imaginary customer that kind of maybe didn't really exist. And first issue, we came out with Anne Caroline on the cover and stick-on tattoos and stuff, and it was like 50,000 first issue from I don't know, maybe in 20s, something like that. So we just immediately turned it into a like racing, trail, downhill, long travel thing, rather than what it had been. And it was good times.
We did some cool trips.
We did some cool trips,
yeah.
And that came from the fast bikes.
Okay.
The fast bikes was all about the trips.
Yeah.
It'd be like you go to work on Friday knowing that you're going to be going to France, to South France, so you can take some photos, and it'd be like, but we're still here working. And it's like, so you'd be setting off at like 5 p.m. You'd be on the Channel Tunnel, and then you'd basically still be expected to be down in the south of France that evening, which is,
it's quite a long way.
Yeah.
Totally doable in the 90s with the A26 the way it was, because literally you just drain a tank in like 40 minutes at 150 plus miles an hour. You're basically going as fast as the slowest person in the group would go.
Which is probably quite fast.
The Fast Bikes magazine, yeah. Mate. It's like
it's all
we just, but absolutely unacceptable behaviour.
Things are a little bit more sensible these days, aren't they? It's all a bit more dull.
But that was, that became the MBI thing. Then it was all about wheelies.
Yeah. Lots of wheelies.
It was loads of wheelies.
You rode some cool places though. Any really stand out looking back? You did Cap Dye, did you?
Oh yeah.
Bike test down there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pete Crump was on that one.
Yeah, so just before we started, we were talking about Pete Crump, a friend of ours.
Literally just bumped into one of the 90s racers, just wandering around Forest of Dean on foot, just out for a walk. And he was literally doing a race there. And he was reminding me of that trip. It's like how cool that was. And we did an awful lot of those trips where we just get people on bikes and just smash out a trip. No, my favourite one though was the Cannondale Fulcrum.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, really well.
Clive Gosling,
who's now back at Cannondale.
Hi, Clive. Gave us the bike. We've got to get it in the studio. Don't have studio time until tomorrow morning. I'll come and pick it up at 2:00 tomorrow. So we had the bike for 36 hours. And we got it down to the south of France, did a photo shoot. He said, "You're not riding it." And no, what we want to do is we want to do this in the studio. And got it in the studio and did the time-lapse photo of how the suspension worked with all the linkages. It's like an early VPP style thing with all the chains and linkages. And we just did a time-lapse to show the movement of the suspension. So as soon as he left the car park, it was being loaded into the Renault 21 estate car. Me and Paul, the photographer, were literally on the way to the tunnel. We literally drove all the way down to Aix-en-Provence and did... That was the first sun we saw. And we just found ourselves a bit of... waste ground and some steep slopes and made it look absolutely epic. And then literally just decided, got everything we need, load it back up, drove back home, and literally Clive rocks up. There you go, mate, there's your bike. And next month it's there, like literally riding pictures and the thing. But yeah, that was quite a good one. But no, the MBI thing was quite cool because you could just get away with a bit more back then. Yeah. He said, you haven't got budget for staff. Yeah, I have. You give me freelance budget. So we just did everything through Paul. We haven't got budget for travel. Yeah, we have. Do it through Paul. Yeah, and it's like, so we just managed it through, different budgets. You got budget for that. You haven't got budget for that.
And is that what then got you? That was the catalyst to start Mojo.
No. Mojo was running in the background.
Mojo was still going. Okay.
Yeah, somebody else was running it, and but yeah, when we got back, just got back into it full time, and it was probably Pete Crump again. Needed his shock fixed for a national race.
Yeah.
It was an Alps 4.
Yeah.
And I think I rang the Fox technical helpline in the States to ask them to say, I don't understand how you can build this without doing it in a bucket of oil. And he said, yeah, you got to build it in a bucket of oil like that. And it's like, you're joking. Is this? And yeah, it literally was. And it was quite a complicated thing. So I had this sort of really early communication with Fox, which turned into a trip to Fox, which turned into an agreement with Fox, which turned into... They weren't selling anything aftermarket at that point, and we were already a suspension service and sales company at the time. I was just buying shocks from Taiwan and getting laser cut linkages and basically doing Todd Tanner kits for Specialized, like Jason McCroy, Todd Tanner, basically bolt on the long linkages for the Specialized stump jumpers. that kind of thing.
You were doing boxer carts at some point?
Oh, that was a lot later.
A lot later.
That was when Fox had started with forks.
Ah, yeah. Okay, so
they didn't
already
like the stickers I did for them, which had 2 X's, Fox carts. They didn't like those.
More logo related shenanigans.
Getting yourself in trouble again.
But no, yeah, the Fox thing started from that, really, just like that
so
initial contact. Okay. And so they were tiny in terms of aftermarket, so were we. And when they started selling stuff aftermarket, that started, we grew together. So the business grew as they grew. Till it all went tits up. So, yeah.
I guess I was going to just say, I remember you being fairly vocal with those guys in terms of their product. If you ever saw any issues with it, or you were always pushing for them to improve. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. They get to a certain point and it stops. It happens with all the companies, but with Fox factory, they were a suspension company that made money by making suspension, and then you get to a certain size and you draw in certain types of staff and you float the company, and then you're a money company that manages money by having a suspension company. So their focus was not the suspension, it was the money. And, they come along and say things like, the guy in Italy sells 1,000 of those trail tune, was it called? The forks with the brain in, the fork with the brain. So it was locked out until you hit a bump, and then it would be locked out until it fall through. No.
Way
It was before that. TCX, I think it was called. So it's like a brain valve. It was dog shit. Are we 10 minutes in yet? Yeah. It was dog shit. But the Italian
unleash the taps.
But the Italian market loved it. And they sold thousands.
Yeah.
And they kept saying, "You haven't sold one." I said, "No, I haven't bought any. I rode it, remember?" and they say, "But you're selling loads of 36s." I said, "Yeah. They're great, aren't they?" "Yeah, but you're not selling any cross-country forks." "Nobody does that over here, mate. That's not what we do anymore. We do things really different." And so they just the focus in the company changed. But we survived it. We survived CTD. That was a shit.
I actually have a note in there about CTD.
Yeah.
It was just, I just remember it very vividly because you asked Jonesy, Muldoon and me to each give written statements so you could take them over.
Do you know what? It nearly killed the company. Do you know what? We did that big motorbike trip and that year, and it was already pre-booked. CTD came along and it's like, oh shit, running out of money. Oh well, one last hurrah. And
because you rode to China on a motorbike.
Did ride to China on a motorbike. But me and Suze are in a hotel room, I don't know, Dushanbe, Tajikistan, got some Wi-Fi, getting rid of all of our savings into propping up Mojo, which was losing money hand over fist. And we were putting the stuff on the shelf because it's like, we don't let it go into the dealers. It's like, so we literally, it's like, I think it was like 150 grand or something. And it's like, just, easy come, easy go. And not easy come actually, but easy go. But it was quite good lesson because it, really teaches you about, when a business is growing, that sort of from flat to growth, you've got that sort of triangle where you've got spare cash flow. It's not spare when it flattens off, because your costs are still going up, and it made us realise. So we learned from that, and we were able to really make the business strong after that, and until basically till the end. So that was cool. But it's only money in it.
Can we talk about Fabian and how that relationship worked?
Oh, of course you can.
Because that was, I always remember that, because he was technically a Fox sponsored rider, which he then became a Mojo sponsored rider, right?
He was never a Fox sponsored rider. It was he'd gone from Marzocchi.
He was on Kona with Marzocchi, and then he came over. He was on Fox product, but with you guys supporting him, rather than the factory.
That's it. And a lot of people, that opened doors. For me to meet a lot of really interesting people because of that. Because a lot of people thought, that's Fox that's provided the money, and CP has sort of wheedled his way into it. It wasn't. It was us. It was
you from
our money.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. It was ace. The very first test session we did with Fabian, I didn't know what to expect. So we had shocks for, was it the Mondraker Kaiser? Was it called the Kaiser?
The Kaiser was before the Summum, yeah.
Yeah, so it was still the Kaiser. Didn't know what to expect. I knew the area. We'd ridden there a lot with MBI and interviewed Nico, and we'd done photo shoots on Pay downhill track, and we'd done all of that stuff. Tim Pontin tried to climb up the top of the radio mast at the top of the mountain. He got to about 300 metres up. It's like, yes. Timmy, all right. I'm just fucking bored now. And but anyway, didn't know what to expect with Fabian, so we turned up with a soft, medium, firm of two different shock options. I think they had that DHX one. Was it the DHX? It was the one with the you could buy it with the remote reservoir.
Yeah, DHX, I think.
Yeah, and it had a guff concave piston which meant you had preloaded shims, but we had a lathe, so we didn't have that. And so we had those, and I think it was, let's say it was vanilla RC. I can't remember what it was, but
probably would have been around then.
Yeah, so we had like soft, medium, and firm, and then we had the forks. We had a couple of different forks, the 40s, a couple of different styles of assembly with different things to make them feel different. Plus soft, medium, and firm in the cartridge, plus all the tools I needed to do shocks and fork valving, and a case full of shims and stuff. And he was like, we turned up, I'm super, super nervous. And he's like, oh my God, he's like a kid in a sweet shop. He said, the last time we were booked for a 4-day test for Marzocchi, and he said they just brought 2 different types of seals. It's like he thought he'd sort of died and gone to heaven, because it's like really actually interesting stuff to do. So he was doing literally flat out back-to-back runs, and he smashed out day after day of run, and we just be up early every day doing stuff and finish late, and me and Paul will be valving stuff and trying different stuff in the evening. Paul won't, he's really into it, won't he?
Yeah.
And we learned loads of dirty French tunes from Fabian in the van, and it's like all sorts of things go on. And then at the end of the week, realise he'd been riding the whole week with a 3-week-old broken scapula. He's like
machine. What was it like working because Fabian's sort of quite a detail-orientated person, obviously likes his testing, has sort of quite strong opinions on things at times perhaps, and obviously you're quite similar. Like, did you sort of clash at all? Did you always sort of align with what you were thinking, or was it an easy relationship?
I'm prepared to give my opinion if I think the other person is wrong. But when you're dealing with someone like Fabian, there's probably more of a chance to learn something if you just shut up and listen. Which I don't do often, but it's listening to him was really useful and allowed me to learn a lot of new stuff as well. But yeah, of course we disagree. He thinks AC/DC is the pinnacle of modern music. It's like, of course we disagree. But
it must have been quite a vote of confidence having Fabian. So at that point, he would have been at least 2-time elite world champ.
Yeah,
taking on a tuning company rather than the full sort of factory supported brand itself.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we had the confidence to do it. I'd already made like modifications to shock absorbers for Nico without Fox knowing about it. Okay. So he'd be asking, and I can't fucking get on with this. And so we do. What would it be in French? Merde. So we'd already been doing a little bit with different people, and we had the confidence. At the time, we were we were running the orange,
because you already had a race team. So you had the infrastructure to a degree, right?
So, and at one of the seasons when they started with the sort of team ranking points, our team was in the number 1 position at one point. It's like, this is ridiculous. Cool. This is absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, we had the confidence to do it. But it didn't go down well with Fox.
Okay.
Us doing the work independently with Fabian. Which is like, I never really, in a sense, of course you give a shit, because there's a lot of people that rely on you for their mortgages. But at the same time, you've still got to try stuff, and that's how you learn stuff. And there was a certain strata of people within the company at Fox that really loved what we were doing, and we all could deal with really easily. And then there was a certain strata of people in the company that didn't like the messaging. It's like, so we had, I can't remember which race it was. There was a world champs in Australia.
Canberra.
Yeah. So we built an Air Fox 40 before there was an Air Fox 40 for that. And in the end, he opted to run
a 36. Didn't he?
He opted to run a 36 with a stacker under the head tube instead. But that fork, we tested that winter, and he rode it at a couple of races. We had 2 positive chambers to straighten out the air chamber as much as possible, and we had a negative air chamber. All 3 were configurable. We had a needle that we shoved through a rubber bung into the negative chamber, and we had 2 Schrader valves in the top cap that was a 36 top cap with an extra one drilled in. All of the pistons, all of the seal blocks, we machined on our little lathe in Mojo and Riska, and just made the rest of the parts out of parts that already existed. And we made a 200mm 3-air chamber fork that weighed, I don't know, at least the steel coil spring less than the stocker. And we couldn't run it because it was too obvious, because there was no preload cap. So all we did was just cut a piece of stanchion off and put a top cap on the valve. So you could hide the valves. So because the valves were up above the top cap, so you had this so if it was obvious it wasn't stock, because I chose the colour, so it wasn't a very good match with the rest of the stanchion. But
purposefully,
it was completely obvious it wasn't stock. But he did run it at a couple of races.
That's wild. So that would have been at least 4 years before they actually brought out the production version of the
Yeah. I think it's still in a box at work, I think.
That's so
Still have it.
You sort of said that you're, obviously quite willing to try different things to learn what's going on. And obviously, when you ran the downhill team, there was, the skin suits, the black rubber skin suit, sort of famously seen at Fort William and things. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I'd heard this story that, I think Cathro was racing it and was practicing in his normal kit, and then for the race run, you said put the skin suit on. And he basically missed the first corner because he was going that much faster because of the aerodynamic. Is that true, or
possibly? I know it worked. I did a few Masters World Champs, and each time I would try something different. So, one time I did lead weights, one time I did skin suits, and one time I did high pivots with idlers. So we literally made an idler for the orange.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that really well.
And so each time I go to Masters Worlds, I try something different. And one of them was the skin suit. And me and my mate Mark, we're going to do it. We're going to wear the skin suits. And I'm asking the riders to do it. I have to do it.
Yeah.
And I was a bit trimmer than now, and I popped the skin suit on, got in a queue, suffered the slings and arrows, set off down the track, and at the start of the track there was a really long, fast section, not super steep, but into a sort of man-made hump on what was a piste. It was pra-loop, so it's like a ski piste. And in the middle of the piste was this pagoda style thing. So it would have been probably somewhere to hang out if it was a ski place. But because it was like this man-made thing, you were coming into it really fast, going, oh, if that was just a little bit quicker, I could take off here and land down there. But all the time you're really loading it and pulling and not quite making it. First time in the skin suit, I thought I wasn't going to land. It's like you take off and it's and you're trying to push it down, never mind, can pull it up. And then blow out the first corner because it's
that much difference.
It's too fast.
That much difference. We literally did test it. We found ourselves a fire road at Abercarn.
As it's the roll down test.
Yeah. So, and it was fully enclosed with trees, so you're not subject to a wind problem. And we had the free lap testing kit, which was you could do it in, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then total. And we did that. We literally had a point where we let go of the brakes and then rolled down the hill, and then it logged the times as you went through. And free lap's pretty good, it's really accurate testing. And we just did 2 of us. So it was me and Tim, and we did everything from sat up on the saddle in baggies with peak to in the tuck, in the skin suit, no peak. And it was, I think, I'm not remembering exactly, but I think the longest time, so the sat up in baggies with the peak, was, let's say, 1 minute 30. And these are approximate times. And each sector from slow to fast, there would be, you'd see an improvement everything you did, baggies in a tuck, then skin suit sat up, then skin suit in a tuck, then lose the peak. 30 seconds different on a minute 30 course. It was 30 seconds faster.
Whoa.
It was insane.
Yeah.
And obviously you're not going to get that when you're talking about setting the speed through bravery and brakes and stuff like that. And I read so much shit online after the skin suit thing about, it's only worth 2 seconds. And I'd be like, might be for you, but for someone who's braver, it will be worth more.
Yeah. Do you think we should? I also sort of thought it was a bit of a shame that they banned skin suits. From
completely and utterly, because it makes the sport a sham, really, because it is not as fast as you can possibly go down a hill. It would be like downhill ski racing in jeans. No, we've got to wear jeans, and these are the regulation jeans.
You have to wear a 501.
Yeah. And then, then somebody will start wearing a boot cut instead of a, and it's like that. It needs to be as fast as possible. To me, it seems it's just like it's not as fast as possible. The bike's not aerodynamic. The rides are not aerodynamic. Anybody that's ever done any kind of work in human-powered vehicles knows that once you get over a very, medium speed, like 20-something kilometers an hour, all of the improvement comes from aerodynamic. You can be as powerful as a horse, but the improvement comes from the aerodynamic at that point, and it's like really, really important in downhill racing where you're averaging 40 to 60 kilometers an hour.
And now we've got stuff like the Fox speed suit.
Yeah, which is hilarious.
Oh, brilliant! It's my favourite thing I saw this.
I think it's ace. I think it's brilliant, and it's just fucking wear it.
Rules are there to be bent.
Yeah. What was Chris Ball's best result? It was the one where he rode in his underpants. He had quite an aerodynamic shape, didn't he?
In Calgary, is that right? Yeah.
No, was it Calgary or was it Bromont? I can't remember.
I think it's Calgary in protest because he hated the track,
and
right?
He was ringing me in the evening saying it's shit. We've flown him all the way out to Canada, him and Pangus and Ball. And Paul Angus, who is now the Huck Wizard. Have you seen him on YouTube? Look him up. Hilarious.
Huck Wizard is worth watching.
Anyway, good hair, Paul Angus.
Very good hair. Same as Rowe, really. You've
bigger, I think.
Oh yeah, in terms of volume, without a doubt. Yeah.
So anyway, Chris Ball rang me, said it's pants. And I said, well, just do it in your pants then. And
he did?
He did. Yeah. And he wrote something, and he was disqualified for bringing the sport into disrepute. So I paid my euros and had him reinstated. I paid my euros.
Right.
They said he was bringing the sport into disrepute. I said, no. You ran a downhill race on a ski jump hill, a mound, basically a man-made mound. I said, you brought it into disrepute.
You've been sort of at the forefront, obviously, of quite a bit of change. You talked about the stuff you did with Fox, fiddling about inside, maybe annoying some people every now and again, the skin suits, the racing, all that sort of stuff. But obviously, I guess your more later stuff was Geometron. You got, you've always had outspoken views, I guess, on geometry and suspension tech and making things faster. And you've done a lot of experimenting. I know sort of the clutch is off, for example, on your mech.
It's actually in the bin.
The clutch is in the bin.
Yeah, you can literally just take them off on the Shimano ones. Yeah.
How did sort of you end up being such... how did you sort of end up thinking so hard about bike performance, and how did you end up thinking about, geometry and suspension? How did you end up with Geometron?
It's racing. That's it. It's racing. That's what drives it. If Fabian wants to go faster, then he's going to have a geometry that works for the speed of the course. If you think of the two contact patches of the bicycle like the shape of a ski, and I'm not a skier, but I've done it once, and I felt what it was like. It was a fast bikes trip, actually. It was hilarious. We were all in our motorcycle winter gear with our plastic boots going clumping our ways to the ski. I'll see you later. Like pretending to be like the Austrians. But we had a wicked time wearing our leathers and our waterproofs. But when you lean the ski over and load that outside ski, the ski conforms, and you can lean forward or backwards. If you lean backwards, what's it going to do?
You lose the front end.
No, you go straight. And if you lean forwards, what are you going to do? You're going to corner, and that's how you slow down on the ski, because you don't have the handbrake. So take that to here. This is the one that points forward. And this is the one that gets you around the corner. And if you've got too much on that, by the time you start coming out the corner, then you're going to have to pedal to come out the corner, which is guff. You've got to be able to transfer to that. You set the direction of the vehicle with that, and then once it's leaned over, you are the ski. But the sort of that geometry will be changing depending on what kind of corner. So if a World Cup course was loads of, like berm to berm, like you'll find in the Forest of Dean, maybe there's like 4 minutes of that. The bikes you would ride for that would be very different to the bikes you'd ride for something like Fort William. You could use a very different shaped bicycle. But if you want to win a point-to-point race on a bicycle from point A to point B downhill, there's no point making your bicycle for the slow turns. Don't try and get all of your advantage in the place where you're doing 4 or 5 miles an hour. Look at where Aaron Gwynn was making all his time when he was at his best. He was the best on the fast stuff. And, there were loads of other people that were really good at it. And Jesus, when you're on the head cam of Amaury Peyron now, it's like I'm looking away. It's like I can't watch it. But that sort of... There's no point making a bicycle that goes round the tight corners well. That's not where you're going to win the race. You've got to make it so that it doesn't lose speed in the fast turns.
Was it inspired through... Obviously, we were working really close with Fabian, who was on Monreka, and Cesar obviously took on and did like the forward geometry stuff. I'm guessing you already had sort of bits and pieces cooking before that.
Oh, you read some of the stuff that I wrote about bicycles in the 90s in MBI, and I was always saying this could be a bit slacker, this could be a bit longer, this could be a bit lower, and all of those things. We had the ability to do that with the Intense M1 for a while. It had so much adjustment. We were importing Intense when Sean Palmer was riding it. How cool was that? They were hard to deal with. Jeff won't mind me saying that, will you, Jeff? He was hard work. He was really into what he was doing, but he was not a businessman at that point. And we'd order stuff, and it's like, how have we ended up with a yellow front triangle and a red rear triangle? That's not what we ordered. So Argos in Bristol ended up changing an awful lot of M1 colour schemes for us. We just get stuff in, it's like, oh no, not again.
But you kept it local.
Yeah. And so you could make a bike that for the time worked, like really quite good. You could make it do all sorts of things. I mean, it was stupidly short compared to what they are now. The M1 that I took to Worlds in 98, Masters Worlds, I could literally lean back quickly and coaster wheelie from the seat. You just literally lean back and coaster wheelie from the seat. It was so short. But it was ace. And that was the one that Rob Warner rode for qualifying when he snapped his swing arm. That was on Instagram not so long ago, actually. So we'd been thinking about bikes and how to make them better for a long, long time. And we imported, it never really came to anything. Do you remember the V process Nico was doing? He had a batch made and we had one. It's called a Spike, I think. Like a 6-inch travel trail bike. And we were like, do you know what? This is really good fun. There's quite a lot of travel for the day. And we were thinking, why wouldn't you just have a downhill bike that you could pedal up? And it took us donkey's years to get around to basically building that, the sort of motivation to build a bike that handles really well down the hill, but allows you to get up it. And came to a lot of conclusions. The steeper seat angle just makes sense. The amount of travel and the angle doesn't stop you getting up the hill. That's a physiological thing. It's more about this triangle than that triangle. It's
on the climbs.
100%. Yeah, 100%. That doesn't matter where your front wheel is to get up. It's you're using your strength, and if you're using it really well and efficiently, then you'll just go up faster. Yeah. Full stop. Yeah. And so if it's 2 kilos more than the cross-country bike, that's 2 kilos on a human vehicle system. The vehicle can't go up on its own. The human has to go up with it. So it's like 2% maximum. Doesn't matter. So we've always had this idea that you could just have one bike and maybe 2 sets of wheels. And that was what we did.
I just remember seeing the drawing, and Chris was like a child at Christmas, very excited about what was coming, and it was very cool.
Yeah, it was. And we sold one straight away to a guy at Fox, who, clearly was riding in the woods with a lot of bicycle designers, because when we used to go out on our, the Fox launches, we'd be riding. It's Brandon from Specialized, it's X from, you just bump into people because they're all down there. And then that first Specialized stump jumper came out with 63.5 degree head angle, 335 BB, 1290 and 445, and it's like, that's exactly
Stumpy Eva, right? Still in my garage. That's my when everything goes wrong here bike. It's still current.
It was literally the very first medium sort of G1.
Yeah.
So
it must be really cool though to know that you kind of played a part and influenced, because not only that, stuff like the offset. You were always experimenting.
Banging on about. I remember you and Seb talking a lot about that sort of stuff.
Seb talks even more than me, doesn't he?
On the right thing.
Yeah.
He's pretty frugal with his words. If you get him onto something like offset,
oh God, can't shut him up. No, it was cool. He came to visit us. He'd only just started working with you guys, hadn't he?
Right,
and it was like, I can imagine the scene. And you'd say,
I was like,
"Oh yeah,
on.
you do that."
I mean, that was literally yeah. You'll have a lovely time.
But no, it was really good, and it was because Fox had done all the 3 different offsets for the 36, but they put all the offset in the crown, so you could just swap them round, and all the stanchions were the same length, and it was pretty cool because it allowed you to try things back to back. And when you do it like that, one run this, next run like that, you really notice it.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I think as an industry, we don't have enough of, because it's come from bicycling, so it's human powered, and if a rider is having a bad day, the rider goes, "I'm having a bad day." They don't go, "It's as my tire pressure changed, as has my fork got sticky?" They don't think of the things that could have changed. You just think, "Oh, I'm having a bad day." And you never solve the problem because you say, "I'm having a bad day." But when you're working with someone like Fabian, or I imagine, you're working with someone like Valentino Rossi, he doesn't come in and give you the problems list, and then the guy in the box at Yamaha would have said, "You're probably just having a bad day, mate, Vale." You can't say that to Fabian either. You just maybe you just need to fucking pull your finger out. You're probably just having a bad day. You can't say that, and he's not going to think that. He's going to say, "What have we changed? Why am I not feeling?" At some point, a racer is going to have to just ride through it. But while you're testing, that's how you find. That's how you find the solutions. And we basically made bicycles that were a bit safer and easier to go faster on. Safe as how long is a piece of string, isn't it? Because you put yourself through trees even faster. But
I remember the first time I ever rode one, I think it was maybe 2015 or maybe something like that. We went to Risk, we went to sort of your test tracks behind Mojo. I'd never ridden there before.
They were tight, weren't they?
They were, but it was pissing down with rain. It was horrible. Jumped on this bike that was like about that much longer than anything else I'd ever ridden, and like rode these tracks blind, just feeling like an absolute hero. It was bizarre. Like I, got to the bottom, thinking, Jesus Christ, like there is something like. And
in the day, at that time, the contrast was quite sharp.
Yeah, massive
because the bikes were very different.
Yeah.
You might have come off something like, I use it as an example all the time. That video that Santa Cruz did for the first Bronson with Josh Bryceland. It was awesome riding. But if you ride a medium Santa Cruz Bronson like Josh did, you're not going to look like that. It was dangerously small and steep and short. Josh can ride it. But so you would have been going from something like that in those woods to that.
Yeah.
And you'd look at it and you'd say, these tracks are built by the smallest human beings in the Mojo family. It was Joey Taylor and Tom Wheeler, who were both like, we were talking hobbits earlier on. Tom won't mind me saying that. But they were the shortest people at Mojo, and they built the tightest track, basically to fuck us up, didn't they? But it turns out that the XL version of the first G1 with the 820 bar, and the 184 con was the one that went fastest through there. But it was like, if the bicycle is stable, you can actually corner it quite hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that long ski.
Yeah.
It works when it's on the side. It doesn't work when you're dicking about playing, you know, in the car park.
I think the interesting thing about that bike as well is it was a pinion one. Maybe like you're practicing with a pinion or something.
Yeah.
I remember riding that, and you know, again, if that bike was here now, you'd be like, that's the latest. You know, that's the most.
Yeah.
And it was
on trend.
It must have been a good
11
10
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like certain things, you know, certain things move forward, certain things don't, you know. And, you know, I'm riding a bike that is 3 years old, and it looks every bit of the 3 years old. But I've still got more ability to change that to what I want than any other bike. And I'm waiting for the new G1 version with the pinion. I'll probably end up putting a chain on it because I won't like to be dictated to by belt length.
Sure.
You know, with this rear triangle shape. When we went through the process of actually designing our bike for the first time, rather than just asking Nikolai to put numbers to it, and we put in a bigger down tube, and we changed gussets and cable routing and swing arm pivot positions, and we changed an awful lot of stuff. But we just started working with EXT, and Franco at EXT, just like, what a guy. And he's like, he can, just, Chris, what do you want? You know, tell me what you want. It's like, really?
Anything?
Can I have spherical eyelet bearings? Yeah, of course. Anything else? Can I have a negative spring inside? Well, why not? Yeah. Anything else you want? And it's like, we were just going through, and he's like, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that.
A bit like Fabian when he went testing with you with all the...
Yeah. And he just made it, and that's why that's back on today. It's like, yeah, the V4 exists, but that was the first time we'd got to a position where, you know, literally the first rear shock absorber I rode on a bicycle with spherical eyelet bearings was that Honda RN1. Nice story about that. We got it delivered.
How did you get to ride that?
So we were sponsoring a Honda Dakar rider.
Right.
Mick Extance. Hello, Mick. So anyway, we used to sponsor Mick, and it was a big deal for Honda. They had this Dutch company making rally kits for what was basically an enduro motorcycle. They were cool. You know, literally there was tanks in carbon fibre that hung off the side, hung off pins at the top, so they were really easy to get off. Rerouted of all the radiators. Exhaust was routed back underneath. Full bash guard with room for water and tools. You know, it's like full proper Dakar bike, but from a kit. And we got quite in with Honda because of that connection with Mick, and the boss of Honda Motor Europe at the time, as was Welsh boy, wasn't he? And me and Mark Davis got on. You know, he just loved us for some reason. It clicked, and he loved what we were doing. And he asked me to do a little business plan for commercializing the project. So, you know, we've done a lot of business plans through the years, and we just wrote one. And he thought it was ace. And we had a meeting around the table with head of Honda Motor Europe and one of the directors from Japan. in the kitchen upstairs at Mojo. Literally, this guy's flown in from Japan. And we were talking about the commercialization of this Honda project. In order to commercialize this, he's like, you have to ride it. That's okay.
Sure.
We can find a couple of minutes. And he just sent us a bike straight from HRC in Honda. And it was about the box was as big as from me to Tom, and that wide as well. It literally came, it's like freight with padlock. And we're like prizing the top, looking inside. And there's a fully built Honda RN1 inside.
No way.
Production, ready to go. Aluminium box, aluminium frame. Literally production bike, ready to go. I think it was the UCI that stopped that happening, because there was just such a bunch of pain in the asses. It's like the reason that road bikes have got slacker seat angles and they have to stand up going up the coals is because the seat's in the wrong place. They should be able to move the seat around. Oh, no, the UCI don't let them. The seat's got very narrow window within which it can be, which is why all the time trial seats have got like the pad on the front, so you're just basically avoiding inserting it. But you make more power from that position. You're just not comfortable. This Honda bike turns up. We've got the bike for 2 days, and then they're going to take it back and display it at Honda Motor Europe, which was somewhere in Berkshire, I think, at the time. They were going to display it in the foyer because they were still running the team at the time. Brendan and Greg came just down from our house doing the 104. Do you remember that? I did all the 104s with them.
So that's what that is. But to people that don't know, that's when they were. Jonesy had his test track for dirt, didn't he? And he would invite pro riders down to try to beat that or set a time, not necessarily beat it, but
and Sam's Hill's still the fastest time, but he didn't follow the same track as everyone else. But it was because he could do it. So, what the rock he pulled up over, I don't think I'd get over it on my trials bike now. Never mind. But anyway, so this bike turned up. Steve Jones from Dirt Magazine is getting something done. I can't remember what was happening. I can't remember what it was, whether it was a product test or a service story. I can't remember what Steve was doing there. But Steve Jones was coming in through the front door of Mojo, and I was shaking him by the hand saying, I'm going to leave you as such and such, as Tim was wheeling the bike out the back door into the back of the van. So while Steve Jones was actually at Mojo, we had an RN1 and we were test riding it on the hill above. Actually, no, I think we went up to Cumcarn.
What was the Honda like to ride?
Okay, it was a hideous shape because it was designed for someone about your size.
That's fine. Sample size.
The Japanese population is on average smaller than Northern European population, and I guess the test riders that were riding it would have been basically smaller than us. So in terms of shape, it was guff, but in terms of managing that shape to the best and to describe how that feels, I used to describe suspension tuning in the old days as fucking up the suspension to give you the rider shape you need. So if you don't have the head angle, then you're going to have to hold that up and hold this down. You're going to have to do, you can't have it all. You can have one or other. And the Honda was really good. It had, I'm guessing, sliding bushings. I can't say for sure, but it had aluminium upper tubes. So I'm guessing
Showa.
It was Showa, yeah. So, and the feel from that fork was like no friction so you can add damping. So you get that feel without getting the sort of falling away. You know, you get the support without it just going stiction, fall. So you get that sort of, the harder you hit it, the more support you get. And, you know, the faster riders, the racers still love a lot more damping than your average guy, but they're also working against this friction as well, which that didn't have. And then the rear shock absorber, it was like butter because it had the spherical eyelet bearings. It's like you don't realise how much it impacts the feel until you take it away.
Okay.
And yeah, so it was ace. And it just felt special to be riding it.
So is that where you wanted that spherical bushing from?
Yeah.
Inspiration from
100%. Never owned a racing motorcycle that didn't have spherical eyelet bearings. And you look at how much material there is in a motorcycle. If they're doing that to counter the flex of the machine, the chassis, then we really should be thinking about it with this.
Is that one of the, you know, if you could sort of change the bike industry as a whole and go to every manufacturer and be like, this is what you need to change, would that be one of the things then you would say to pretty much everyone?
Oh, pick a component. They all, you know, everything is just...
Nothing's right.
Well, it could all be better.
Yeah.
But it's because, you know, why are we running a steerer tube like that?
What do you want to see?
You know, it's like, what? Well, yeah, what do you want to see? You now have to change the fork connection standard, you have to change the frame connection standard, and you have to change the bearing connection standard. Then you have to change the handlebar connection standard too. And that's just one thing.
Right.
You know, and you have to go through the whole bike. There are better ways of doing all of it. Of course there are. And there are loads of people out there who could do a way better job of it. A lot of them working in the bicycle industry. But they've got to buy a front end that bolts in. They've got to buy a rear end that bolts in, and it's all got to bolt together.
There's a lot of parts on there that can be changed and swapped out and lengthened and changed. Is that Is that partly because you want people to be able to test, or you want to be able to sort of play around with shapes, geometries, all that sort of thing? Or is there a bit of future proofing in there as well?
Bit both, you know. But you watch a rider ride, and you know we at company have done it so much now, we can see what's going on, and you can see what you need to change to make the bike come to the rider. So instead of this idea that you need to get into a yoga position and twist your hips and point your shoulders where you need to go, you know, get into some kind of bizarre riding position in order to get round a corner. If the bike's the right shape and it gives the rider the right space to be in, the rider slots into the right space for the corner. You don't have to get into some contorted yoga position to get round a corner on a bicycle. It should look comfortable. Why shouldn't it? You know, you shouldn't look like you're having to do something weird with your body. It should be comfortable. And you can see that when you look at different riders, so you have to make enough space to be able to change all of that. You know, you have to, you know, some riders have got different shaped bodies, some riders have got limitation in, you know, joints, and, you know, you have to be able to change all of that to make someone look and feel comfortable on a bike. So that's why we put in as much stuff, really. You know, I went through a period round the sort of end of the Fox period and the start of the sort of current sort of business period and the Geometron, and I'd go to events and it'd be billed as a suspension setup day. I'd never touch a clicker. I'd spend the whole day going, do you know what? I'm going to turn these levers upwards a little bit, and this is why I'm going to do it, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what you might notice, but can you, if you don't like it, put it back, but I'm doing it for this, and that's why your arms are hurting when you're going downhill, and so I'd just be changing stuff on the bike, and you'd be rolling bars forward, and it's like, you might notice that, you'll be able to, you've got a bit more room to move now that you're holding the bar here instead of here, and so I'd spend a lot of time just changing stuff, and the amount of times I've changed cleat position on riders on clips because I can't get them to drop their heels, and then as soon as you do it, they'll drop the heels. So it's having that adjustability in the chassis is really important, I think, to be able to get a rider to start being comfortable and loading the bike properly.
Yeah.
And so we're on to what iteration on Geometron we are now? It's the G1, but with
the
pinion?
Geometron business we handed over to the boys a couple of years ago. So now,
Sam and Marcel.
Yeah, so they're now directors. We gave them the poison chalice and said, it's yours. So now they are running it, and and it's really interesting the change. I rode the new G1 as designed by pretty much Sam. Marcel is, I'm not going to say the brains behind the outfit because Sam's a smart kid. But Marcel wasn't riding at the time, so the riding input was coming purely from Sam. And it was really, really stark that when I rode the bike first, I didn't really enjoy it on the stuff that I designed the previous versions on.
Okay.
Let's say, if we have to talk Staunton, and I know that both of you guys know that area quite well, it'd be like, I'd be thinking like Jonesy's, Quarry, and I don't know, Dead End Down, things like that, bit of Billy's, and used to really enjoy riding those tracks, and those bikes will work really well. But the new bike didn't seem to gel with that.
Okay.
And then as soon as I went to the steep stuff at Wysham, it's like,
yeah,
now we're cooking. We've changed how we ride. When we first started pedaling up to downhill down, if you like, rather than downhill days on uplifts, we were eking as much out of the hill as possible. You go round and round, and there'd be loads of turns where you didn't have to use the brakes because you were trying to keep your speed and you were trying to eke as much out of the track as possible. Now we're just going up the hill and downhill, and there's a lot of braking turns, and he was right. His shape is better.
Okay.
His bike is better at what we do now.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see how that changes, because maybe I'm not the person to be doing it anymore. Maybe I'm qualifying for my 60 plus category at the UCI licenses next year. Maybe I'm not the person to do it anymore. I can have an opinion, I can have input, but
I think that's interesting though, because I think different bikes work in different, obviously different bikes work in different places, and we've done it in the past, have written features and stuff like that about how bikes don't work here, but they do work there.
Yeah.
And that's because where they're built is what they're built for and what they're good at doing. So you're kind of saying that actually the new Geometron works on the really steep stuff, whereas the older ones maybe was a bit more...
Well, I mean, when we first started designing that would have been, 2017? We were still riding Dead End Down, and we were still riding, we'd probably still go and do laps of Cumcar and cross country course, do you know what I mean? Whereas now if you go to Cumcar, you ain't going to ride the cross-country course. You're going to ride the steeps at Risker. You know, you're going to Rondiro, where, you know, that's like decades old now, isn't it? But, you know, it's like you're going to ride different stuff.
Yeah.
You're not going to ride what we used to ride when we were riding that. So it's things have changed. So you are going to need to be able to turn the bike with the brakes on. And his change in the sort of relationship between front centre, rear centre, and head tube height, rider position, that's really helped with that. You know, to the point where first time I rode it, I was on a 29. Second time I rode it, it was a 29 rear wheel, which I never ride. I always ride these 27.5s, and I just find they just want to go straight on. But it wasn't. It was turning just fine. You know, he designed it with that wheel, made it work. And when we sold, do you remember Simon Andre?
Yeah, I know.
The Orbea designer, he bought, just after he designed the Rayon for Orbea, he bought one of the G15s, same generation that you had. And he bought all of the mutators, all of the adjustments. At the time, it was just a longer swing arm. He bought everything. And he ran it with 27.5, mullet, and 29. So it was way before anyone was doing mullet for real. And in the end, he said, it's brilliant. This adjustment is fantastic. I love the way it all works. He said, but I can tell you designed it with a 27.5 wheel. It's just, it works in that configuration. It's just correct. And it's, you know, that if you change a major thing like wheel size, you're changing a big relationship.
So Sam's got, or Sam and Marcel have got the Geometron business, but you're still working with EXT with Jack?
Yeah. Working is a big word, isn't it? You know, not doing an awful lot of work. Just come back from 2 months away, haven't I? So it's that the bicycle industry's pretty quiet at the moment, isn't it? So, you know, things are pretty tough. So yeah, Jack can cope on his own, and I ain't going to be around forever. So it'd be cool if he can start doing his own thing with it, which he is doing.
Another smart kid. And EXT are working with Intense Factory Racing this year.
Yeah,
which is cool to see.
Yeah, in fact, you know, Jack was in one of the Skeens teams with Ollie.
No way.
Yeah, you know, that was like donkeys years ago.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's how these connections work, isn't it? They wanted to try something new, I guess. And Ollie had been seeing what Jack's doing a lot. You know, he hangs around South Wales a lot. He's going to see a lot of EXT shocks and forks around. So, you know, he's going to see a lot. So he was quite keen to try it. And, you know, probably like the Fabian thing, they turn up for the first test with EXT and they've got a van with flipping dynos and data loggers and, you know, shocks with different configurations, and you know, they'll have a very strict protocol of how to test stuff as well. You know, they don't just give the teams free rein, because, you know, quite often a team, you know, with best will in the world will just get lost. You know, you need to have some discipline, and EXT have got some pretty good test protocols, because they've done testing with guys like Sebastian Loeb, you know, at WRC level. You know, they're pretty...
It's established in that sense.
Yeah, you know, they know how to create a linear path to improvement. You know, you don't... If it's a linear path to improvement that you want, you know, you've got to be really careful about coming off side roads. You know, you've got to be really focused on that one thing. I think they've really enjoyed the process. I think Joe's really enjoyed the process. Ollie's really enjoyed the process. And I think it's time somebody did something different in the sport. Whether this will be it or not, I don't know. The fork itself is very different. You know, there are sliding bushes. It is a really different feeling fork. You can run a lot of damping and it's still comfortable. You know, in our testing, our feedback every single time we rode it from the off was like, it's weird, it's brilliant, but it feels too slow. But it's not too slow. It feels too slow. And every time you talk about the slowness of the damping, and every time you go, but it's not uncomfortable and it doesn't upset the handling, it's actually a bonus.
Right, this is working.
But it feels too slow and I want to try it faster. And it's like, I said it, I don't have the self-discipline just to focus on the fact that it's better.
Yeah.
You know, it was just really different to what we're used to experiencing. And the only thing we can put it down to is the fact that you feel the bushings more than you can account for. I've always believed that. You know, I've done a load of slow-mo stuff over the years, and that was one of the things that Fox really pissed off Fox, because I used to change the bushings every ride. You remember that, don't you? Literally, I was changing the bushings and the seals every single ride. I got full rebuild on a Fox 36 down to 9 minutes. It's literally like new bushings and everything. And they wouldn't listen. So I just put in a warranty claim. £35,000 worth of stuff for my fork over the last year. Warranty it. And they said no. But one of the things that I sent with it was a little slow-mo video of me going through some braking bumps without the brakes, and you could literally see the fork would get to a certain point in the travel and block. And Fabian had been talking about this with the Fox technicians whilst I was in China when he did a couple of tests with them, and he was using the word block. It's like, and I can feel it as a sort of discomfort, and I can feel it as this is not working right, but I'm not able to ride to the limit to be able to say this is exactly what it's doing. Each braking bump, you would see the fork would start to work real nice and then reach a certain point and block, where the sort of parallelogram of the lower bushing had done this and just gone slide, and the sort of pressure on that bushing had got to the point where the pressure could move the oil. So rather than having that hydrodynamic
slip plane almost,
you end up back on the friction. You know, it's called the Stribex curve. So the two things together, the hydrodynamic, and then you end up with viscous friction. When you try and move it even faster, the oil won't actually, you know, the molecules won't actually allow it to move fast. So you change the lubrication, the size of the bushings, all of those things change the different points on the Stribex curve. And I was sending them my thoughts on the bushings and stuff, and so I sent them this slow-mo video, and you could literally see it block, and then you'd see the shock wave coming up my arms. I wasn't fat at the time. I think I was like 92 kilos, you know, like, but you'd literally see my wrist collapse. The shock wave would literally go up. So it'd be like this
like a ripple
fold of skin rippling up, and the bicycle would stop and I would be moving forward in space. So it'd be like this. And it's crazy. It just stopped at this particular point. And then, like, Nobody else is saying this. No, but I'm 92 kilos. They're 60. They're not going to reach that point till here in the fork travel. Of course they're not complaining. But Fabian, he was 87 kilos at the time. And he was complaining. He was having the same issues. So it was reaching this point. It's amazing how much you feel the bushes, even a really nice set, really well done. It's amazing how much you feel those in the travel. And if you can make them work differently. I always run them with really baggy clearance. EXT prefer a really tight clearance because their test riders do a certain thing in a certain place, and they're a certain size person. I'm the certain size person I am, and I do what I do. I'm not as brave as I used to be. So one of the things for me that really helps me ride well is when I'm setting up. So the bit where I'm coming into the turn, if I'm not confident, then it comes off. If at that point I get the feedback that I want from the fork, then I can be brave. I can lean it in, do the corner. So for me, that bigger bushing gap with a really quite thicker oil, the oil is thicker, so you should get more viscous friction when you move it fast. But by then, I'm not worried, because by that point, I'm already loaded on it. I need it to be nice and moving when there's not much load, and that's when the parts are touching. And so a thicker lubrication at that point is really important. And if you can get some lubrication to be in there rather than easily moved because it's easily squeezed out because it's thin, then you end up with that. You have a sort of residue that allows the initial movement to get you onto that hydrodynamic part. You can't make it go to the hydrodynamic part if it's stuck. And that's, so for me, it's what I do in my fork doesn't suit what the lads do with their forks, and but that sliding bushing system works everywhere.
So thank you so much, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great to chat through your life on the bike.
It didn't really, did we? Just got sidetracked and started talking about bushing friction.
Well, that's fine too. Absolutely. So thank you as ever, Tom. Much appreciated. And as always, please stay tuned for more videos like this coming soon.